Welcome to our third year of USC School of Architecture's Generation Next. This event began 3 years ago when Alvin Huang, who teaches here and also is a graduate of the School of Architecture here, organized this event for three main purposes. One, to allow young alumni to showcase independent work that they're doing outside of school. Two, to bring alumni together and have a reunion here. And three, to allow students who are here to kind of be inspired by different types of work that's coming out of alumni from the school. And so I was part of that inaugural year of speaking. Myrna was in last year's presentations, and now, as we're both teaching at USC, we're hosting this event this year. Both Myrna and I, we went to USC for undergrad. We went to the same graduate school program, and now we're both teaching here. And despite having those similarities, our work can't be any more different. And we think that that's a huge value of the school, is that it allows various interests within architecture and sometimes outside of architecture to thrive. And we're happy to be able to support young alumni doing their own types of work.
I think you're in for an exciting and inspiring evening. There's a wide range of backgrounds and interests, and we hope you enjoy it. We hope that this tradition continues throughout the next years.
So there will be 10 presentations. It's Pechakucha style, so every presenter will have 20 slides at 20 seconds each, whether they like it or not. The slides will keep going. And following the presentations, there will be a reception in Lower Rosendin, and that will go until 9. Yes. So if you have any questions for the presenters or you'd like to celebrate the work, please come join us in Lower Rosendin, which is on the second floor of Watt Hall, around the corner if you're not from here. Okay, we're going to get started. Our first presenter is Jay Park.
Okay, where do I stand?
Wherever you want. It's all yours.
Okay, I'll stand here. I guess seniors goes first. Okay. Well, thank you. Good to be back. I previously worked for Gary Partners and Jieguers Partnership. My biggest influence was Jieguers Partnership because I got to learn a lot of retail mixed-use projects and became my expertise. So I'm sharing my projects that I designed the past 3 years. The first one, actually, I'm going to talk in general about mixed-use and retail rather than specifics of the project. As you know, the mixed-use is the stacking of a residential tower on top of retail podium. And the retail podium could come in a variety of ranges. In an urban setting, it's a bit more tighter, but in a larger setting, larger site area, it can be a connective tissue connecting all components of the programs, including the residential tower and the surroundings. And this particular project's in Busan, Korea. And the thing about the retail, the form can be very malleable, and you can manipulate the form. So you could easily respond to the nature and some of the metaphorical waves and things like that. And bit of a retail, the F&B is very important because any mixed-use projects, the retail responds to the street and pedestrians, and it brings life into the project and to the neighborhood. So the component F&B is actually very critical for the success of mixed-use projects. And also there's other programs like cultural programs, exhibition hall, and the fitness programs also part of the mixture of a successful retail program that goes into a mixed-use buildings. And the thing about the F&B, again, is alumni, there's increasing more F&B in demand. Perhaps last year, the first time in life, in history rather, more people dine out than dine in. Therefore, there's more demand for restaurants, and shopping malls now used to be 10% of overall tenant mix, but now it's increased 30 to 40%. So the F&B is a very vital program to the whole retail environment. Okay. Moving on. It's a little house that I did in Seoul, Korea. Sort of a continuation of facade becoming the roof, three-dimensional wrapper, and it's a container box. And the next thing is the, moving on to the next slide. Now, the project in Chengdu, China, this is a co-working space. The entire project is dedicated to a co-working space. Now, I think that like a WeWork, We Live is becoming a sort of our lifestyle that younger generations seek. So there's a lot of projects that are dedicated to either co-working, or here, in fact, it's a restaurant, retail buildings, but then there's shared kitchen. So minimizing the kind of redundancy of a kitchen, but restaurant is going to share. So there's a kind of trend that sort of we live, we work, and those business models being reflected in some of the projects in overseas. This is a school, floating amphitheater, create a large public space underneath, and it's about promoting a social interaction and sort of a public sort of collaboration amongst the student. And you're looking at the kind of the lobby version. Now the residential tower in Chengdu, China, there's a trend that there's a minimized area for the living unit, but in return you get larger amenities for the apartments. And it's clear evidence that throughout the projects in LA, the newer projects rather, we start to see the sort of trade-off a public spaces versus a private space. And also hotels adopting that as well. I think the sort of a newer brand or premium brand, they create a sub-brand for cater to millennials, where you have a smaller room with a lower rate, but then they have a lot of amenity space and to cater to target the new market. This is a dual brand hotel in Tucson. I think the left one is a Moxie. It's catered to the younger people, smaller room, lower rate, but great bar. The right is an Element Hotel, the larger room and higher price. And like a lot of amenities, like a swimming pool, is very important amenities to as a marketing strategy. This one is in Hudson, the Height. And my first big project in Koreatown is actually renovation of a hotel facade. I use a polycarbonate panel. They come in at like 30, 40 feet long. So super lightweight skin and easy to install, minimize the labor cost, and due to the low sort of budget, I was able to complete that facade. Now there's a big demand for studio units, and this entire apartment in Koreatown is nothing but studios. And as a developer point of view, studio units has a maximum return per square foot. So sort of you do the math, that's kind of most lucrative type of developments. And also in Koreatown, with the TOC, the communal-oriented transit, or rather transit-oriented community, there's great density bonus and parking incentives. So there's a lot of frenzy developments in Koreatown. And second to last, 6th and Serrano. This is kind of mixed use in steroid. There's a retail, hotel, spa, Korea Jieguers, and then condominium. So it's not too mixed use, but there's the 4 components. And I think it's the right place to do it, because it's the high density of Koreatown and then sort of diverse mixture, young and old. This is the same project, but last year a lot of designs changed, and it's the first the high-up brand coming into Koreatown. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Nick Hopson. I'm together with my wife and partner, Klara Rodstrom. We're Hopson Rodstrom Design Workshop. Klara is at home putting the kids to bed tonight, so you guys get me, unfortunately. So Klara and I met here at USC in 2001 on the first day of school. We started dating 3 years into school, I think, and then we worked for a couple of years here in LA, and then we applied and got into grad school together at Columbia, moved to New York, worked there for a couple of years, then came back here to LA to start our practice and our family. We worked for a couple of years after that before really kind of diving into the whole scene. But we found that the everything all at once approach has worked for us. I think we bought our first house, started our family, and started our business all in the same year in 2015, and have been dealing with the consequences of that ever since. Well, this was our first project. It was a small pool house for a client, a referral in Hollywood, and from there, that's kind of word of mouth has referred a number of other small projects in Hollywood and throughout Los Angeles, and then we've also benefited from our previous experience getting some mixed-use TOC projects as well as part of the kind of building frenzy that's happening in Los Angeles right now as well. So we have a couple of different varieties of projects in our practice right now, ground up and renovation residential work, and then multifamily and mixed-use residential work. And then in addition to that, we're also working on a couple of small arts and cultural projects, some renovations of some industrial warehouse spaces in the Arts District and in Frogtown and in Chinatown into kind of arts work, WeWork, co-working spaces. Klara and I have each had the opportunity to work for a number of really talented mentors and architects in our years since graduating from USC. Klara worked for Whitney Sander, and then she worked for Jeff Alsbrook and Sylvia Kuhl of Standard, for Thomas Leeser in New York, and then most recently with Kulipat Yantrasast of Y Architects. And then she left Kulipat's office in 2015 to start our practice. I stayed on working for another couple of years before joining her in this last year. And since then, kind of the practice has taken off a little bit, and we now are 5 people based in our garage in Glendale, in the hills overlooking Eagle Rock, and are poised to expand even further. So if anybody's interested in an internship this summer, let me know. And yeah, so we have a number of projects that are in the works. We have a couple of small built additions and remodels, but the majority of the stuff that we're working on right now are these multifamily projects, the mixed-use stuff. Our design approach is based a lot on our experience from the number of places we've worked in the past, but also kind of based on the tension of Klara and I's design personalities and our personalities as people. Klara's a very rational thinker, likes to approach things and really explore all options on the table, make sure that she's really done her research, and then kind of moves forward with the approach that is the kind of the cleanest and the most logical. I'm a very intuitive and irrational thinker. I kind of work just kind of spur of the moment, kind of come up with my design intentions, and then I work to kind of post-rationalize. And in that tension, we find that there's a synergy and a harmony when our work is kind of at its best. We tend to are able to see the work through each other's eyes and push each other to make the work better. So some of these projects are taking advantage of what Jay was talking about, the TOC mixed-use density bonuses. The majority of them are 7-story, 2 stories of type 1 construction over 5 stories of 3A, and most of them are on TOC zoned lots in the middle of the city or in West LA. Most of these are in construction documents in the moment, so we are expecting to be breaking ground on these towards the end of the year, and hopefully be finishing some of this initial work towards the end of in the next say 24 to 30 months. As you can see, we are balancing the open space and approaching open space and the amenities in these projects in a variety of different ways, and the scale is getting larger as we move on through the slides. And that would be the last image. Here you go. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Elaine. I graduated in 2012, and since then I've been living in Beijing, Boston, attending GSD, and Tokyo, working for Toyo Ito. And so most recently I moved back to LA and started my own practice. Still not my current urban projects. So I started my own practice just recently called Current Urban Projects. We are an urban design practice, and we're interested in finding new ways of development that enable people to kind of curate their own spaces. And we do this by exploring how architecture can accommodate difference and adapt over time. So I'll be sharing with you a few projects that led to this idea, both academic and professional. Starting with a tech campus in Singapore. This was with Christopher Lee at GSD, and what it is basically finding a typical kind of element and replicating it across a grid, but replicating it in such a way where the in-between spaces could accommodate for different programs like productive landscapes, plazas, and even like iconic buildings. So basically, like aggregation here becomes more about defining the gaps than aggregation itself. And in comparison to, you know, those like big warehouse buildings that are very typical of tech campuses, here the element is lifted from the ground and basically allows the different tenants and startups to define their own kind of public interface with the ground level. And the next project I'll be moving on to is a winery in Omishima, which is a rural island in Japan. This was done with Toyo Ito. In response to the declining economy in this island, winemaking is being introduced to the island. So because it's a very new product, the project asked for like a low budget construction that could adapt over time. So using the kind of roof structure pergola as the basic unit and laying it out around, like as a spiral instead of a linear format, which is typical of wineries. It wraps around like a central space where the visitors and the locals can come together and, you know, do their cultural exchange, host workshops and like cooking classes, really a space to market the island. So the central pergola is like very open and airy, while the ones surrounding it is containing like the winery functions. And I guess like learning from Toyo Ito is that when you design with a structural unit, it expresses like that adaptable nature of a system and also the potential for growth. And the next project is my master's thesis I did at GSD with Anita Rose-Baitier and Christopher Lee, looking at Guangzhou's urban villages, which is like self-built city, completely locally governed by the people. And I was interested in like the social capital that drove these environments. And like beyond the chaos, there's a lot of embedded rules that exist. Like for example, like the alleyways are determined by like the neighborly negotiations between the inhabitants, and also an interesting feature is that it's always changing. Like you can find like a 1920s farmhouse being like invaded by like a 1980s structure. So I was interested in this lineage, and I documented all the existing building types and tried to understand the kind of transformation between each unit. And then also zooming into a more intimate scale, I interviewed and I spoke to many of the inhabitants, whether they were like visitor migrants or original villagers, and the businesses that they ran. And also I identified objects that kind of told a very personal story to the people. So the proposal, the design project was basically, once again, defining a unit, this time a Chinese pavilion, and stacking them on top of each other to meet the density requirements of a city. And this unit can expand and contract, and basically that like fluctuation in dimension is determined by those social dynamics that I observed earlier. And the intention is really, to have this unit replace the old, and it's like a, very natural urban renewal process that already existed from the past. And then lastly, the final sketch I did for this is really trying to tie all the ideas together, showing like the people and the objects and the buildings all coexist in one space, and two, that the space is open-ended. It's always in the process of unfolding. And moving into a more recent project that I'm doing under my office is a high-rise in Wanchai, Hong Kong. And basically it's looking at the new grade A demand in Hong Kong. So like two types of demand require flexible space. However, because of the small footprint in Hong Kong, that flexibility can't happen, in an open plan. So our proposal is to allow it to happen three-dimensionally. So the pencil tower is divided into 8 modules. That is the primary kind of structure, and then the tenants can come in and infill their own secondary structure however they like. And then finally, this is the last project I'm working on, which is an extension of my research I've been doing, looking at Guangdong region once again, and its Greater Bay Area framework, which is basically the region divided into 3 clusters with its own economic hub, and therefore the kind of peripheral cities get the kind of social benefits more effective way. So I'm looking at this impact in a bottom-up angle, analyzing that kind of locally initiated transformation. And with the support of the local government and the local universities, the first form of research is through a studio where I'll be taking 20 students to live and observe the current transformation process. And I guess lastly, the thing I wanted to say is the most fulfilling outcomes is, I think, a result of pursuing ideas both in practice and theory in parallel.
All right, I am the first non-architect who's going to be here. All right, so my name is Augustine. I graduated architecture in 2013. I now run and founded a company called Second Order Effects. Quick pause. This logo is designed by an architect. It looks good, but it kind of says ho sometimes. But anyways, Second Order Effects, we are an engineering consulting company. We focus on electrical engineering. We build custom electronics for various industries, automotive, aerospace, consumer electronics. And so I'm going to just tell a quick story on how I got here, and then I'm going to shout facts about the last 3 projects, because I only have so much time. So a lot of people kind of ask me, how did you get into this? How'd you end up here? And I just got really tired of building bathroom details. You don't really learn how to build anything. So I started looking into technology and manufacturing. You find out that if you want to learn how to build fundamental things, a lot of things are driven by technology, right? So a lot of buildings are determined now based on HVAC and technologies in elevators. So everything that you think of in today's world is based on some other fundamental technology. And so our company, Second Order Effects, we basically took a lot of disgruntled engineers from other companies, and we kind of put them in one place, and we kind of created a small SWAT team of engineers, and we go around, burning down projects that other companies aren't good enough to solve. And these are some of the number of projects. This is one that customer asked us to reverse engineer a product that was no longer built, so we did that. Some of the other projects that we build tend to fall in 3 major categories. Usually, actually 2 major categories. One of them is capacity, one is capability. So usually if you have a really well-funded and intelligent company that just needs to move faster, they can hire us to do that. If they are an old company that specializes in one particular thing, let's say building antennas, but they don't know how to use microcontrollers, they'll hire us to build that for them. So I think this is our last project that I wasn't going to talk about. This is a mechanical coupler for a drone project that we were working on. I don't know why the customer asked us to do this, but we built it for them anyways. One of the benefits of being a consultant is you get to see what all the other companies are working on. So you're not just tied into one particular project that's your own. You get to see what all the other interesting companies are doing, and you also get to see what all the other crazy people are doing too, because a lot of people with bad ideas out there as well. And fundamentally, what's interesting is I've actually found a lot of carryover between the business models between architecture and consulting, because at the end of the day, architecture is a service-based company. Here's the first one I want to talk about. This is our space-rated camera they built for a customer. It has a 100-degree field of view. It's designed to be installed on satellites, and we built this in our garage. And you put this on satellite, and it feeds back 1080p at 30 frames per second to monitor the deployment of particular satellites. That was a particularly hard project. We also underbid that, so that was a really good lesson in economics. Next one. All right. Yeah, so one of the things about our work is that most people will never admit to working with an engineering consulting company, because that indicates that you were not smart enough to solve a problem on your own. So I only have so many projects in here, and only so many approved photos. This is a thermal test chamber, so that's a vacuum chamber with a liquid nitrogen tank next to it. It's designed to heat up the boards and cool them down from negative 40°C to 80°C, and the idea is to simulate in a vacuum environment heating and cooling electronics when you send them up into space. Because when you send them to space and they cycle between hot and cold in a vacuum environment, it'll break most things. But if you have a test chamber, you can kind of test and prevent that. We also wrote science box on the side of that. Okay, so this is the last project I want to talk about. This is our Hadley engine controller. This is one of our more complicated projects that we did with a customer named Ursa Major. They build one of the first and only American closed-cycle RP1 LOX engines. Most of you guys don't know what that means, but basically it's a rocket engine, and it is more efficient than an open loop or open cycle engine. And what's really important about this is that it's American-made, because up until now, all the RP1 LOX engines were made by the Russians, and we have feelings about the Russians. So now that there's an American company making this, that's a photo of it in launch. Yeah, it's really exciting. We're actually working on their next version now. So anyways, that concludes most of the things we're going to say. The one thing that I this closing thought is, everyone's learn to design stuff, learn how to build really, really hard things. It's way more satisfying. All right.
Hi, I'm Meaghan. I'm going to go in a very different direction from that. I graduated in 2013 and just came back from my grad program at GSD. Today I'm going to talk about my work in the general theme of architecture and people. So people not as kind of dimensional constraints and silhouettes, but actually how our physical environment shapes our interaction with others. So I want to start with a definition of cognitive empathy, and this is different from emotional empathy, which is about actually feeling someone else's feelings, and instead about trying to understand and recognize the other person as human. So while emotional empathy is a trait, cognitive empathy is a skill that you have to practice, and that practice mostly comes from physical interactions. Body language, eye contact, and conversation. So the first project I want to talk about is I looked at refugee resettlement in U.S. cities. I found that these interactions are generally very charged when they actually do happen in physical space, and they're generally not happening in places we choose to be, but places we're forced to wait. So, for example, a bus stop, you sit down on opposite corners and tend not to talk to anyone. So for my intervention, I chose to make that seat actually a teeter-totter. So if you go to sit down, you actually have to... Oh, it's not going to play. Oh, it's playing. You actually have to work together with the other person to actually sit down, and even if you don't share a language, you may be able to have kind of this moment of shared understanding. So by integrating these little elements of play into these kind of crappy spaces that we have to hang out in, it can start forming these relationships on a better foot than how they are today. My next project I want to talk about is public housing in New York. So New York has the greatest system, or the largest system of public housing in the country, but it actually has like a 99% occupancy rate, but it's nearly billions of dollars in debt, and they have all of these green spaces due to the tower and park typology, but you actually can't access them because they're constantly blocked off by scaffolding. So they're quickly becoming completely separate from the rest of the city. Using Instagram data as kind of a cipher for public image making, I found that tourists and residents alike are completely ignoring these areas. They're actually becoming these things called NORCs, which are naturally occurring retirement communities, and they're kind of separating away from the rest of the city. So my proposal was to make those scaffolding actual physical permanent structures that provide the protection for the walkways, but also bring in mixed-use program that can provide the financial capital that actually allows for the maintenance of these properties, and they become part of the city again. Last, I'm going to talk about my thesis work looking at Airbnb in New Orleans. So they have this really interesting situation happening right now. They have a housing boom like pre-2008 levels in the rest of the country, but it's happening right next to completely dilapidated housing. So while previously the realm of tourist was kind of isolated to the French Quarter and areas you could access through streetcar, now when Airbnb is being brought in, those lines are completely blurring, and tourists are being exposed to problems of the city that previously were kind of sheltered away from them. So this is not Airbnb as, the mom and pop rent out their spare bedroom that they kind of want you to believe. It really is a semi-professional hotel chain that's just operating an existing housing fabric. And it's completely destroying kind of the host and guest relationship that they pride themselves on. So I'm interested in this kind of in-between space where the Airbnb can be used to actually put new housing units on the market as opposed to taking them off, and those can go to the people who actually live there first as opposed to going to these outside investors. I started with the shotgun home, which is basically a very simple module that has very simple operations that lead to numerous outcomes. So it's pretty interesting. They push the usable space out into the streetway with the stoop, and these units have no hallways as they were originally designed. So you actually move directly from one space to another. And as they're being renovated, people are throwing hallways back in them to kind of make them the typical house. My my proposal is to instead bring that hallway on the outside, and then it can be aggregated in ways that actually allow for interaction as opposed to having just these discrete units. Using lot size as kind of a determination, I paired different types of residents with different types of guests to kind of imagine how these would play out. So in this example, it's a retiree who wants to be able to maintain their independence, but they need a little bit of extra income, so they rent out a spare unit on the top, and this kind of has the most privacy between the two groups. In the second option, it's two families paired together, and the central courtyard allows for the kids to play, and the kids can actually be the ones to kind of bridge the social distance between the two sides. And then lastly, there's something that's kind of uniquely New Orleans in the bachelor and bachelorette party pad. So by pairing that with a newer homeowner, they get the kind of recommendation and experience they would want, and someone has access to home ownership through a greater amount of income than they would normally be able to afford. And so to achieve something like this, and to make sure that the units actually go to the local community, I tried to involve the city funds for affordable housing. So actually thinking about the entire business structure as opposed to just the design, and how you would harness the funds that are already available to the city, and how you could use those to create the spaces that you're interested in. So I looked at all of the different people that are potentially interested in something like this, for better or for worse, and tried to find ways to cater my products to what they would want, and to explain kind of what everyone gets out of this, and try to get people working together that might normally just be opposed to each other. So what I think is really interesting about something like this is you start to see a whole new tourist geography. So these are 28 US cities where the average Airbnb income in that city could actually close the wealth gap between renters and homeowners. So while it's not going to be a universal solution, we start to look at different ways to solve these problems by thinking about people and thinking about the spaces they inhabit first. So I think we could really benefit from employing a kind of practice of empathy and looking at these parts of the built environment that we often ignore, but are actually what people mostly interact with every single day.
Hi, I'm Arjun. I'm a product designer currently based in New York. I graduated USC in 2014 with a Bachelor of Architecture and a minor in Computer Science. My first role out of school was actually with Gary Technologies, which is now known as Trimble. Gary Technologies focuses on facade optimization, parametric modeling, and fabrication. And the first project I worked on was Battersea Power Station. One of the challenges of this product this building was the kind of complex geometry and the overlapping bay windows. And part of my job there was to help build a script that would create vertical panels across the facade and connect those with steel frames of the bay window structures. I also had a chance to work on site at Gary's personal house in Santa Monica, and this might look tame compared to some of Gary's other work, but actually underneath the glass panels are really complex timber structure. My job as a 22-year-old working on site was to help the construction team basically generate construction drawings for every single timber member, and then they would use those to cut each piece of timber, use a crane to lift it, and then drill it into place, like kind of at all these awkward nonsense angles. And you know, there's no logic to this. Like, it looks as confusing as it is. And during the same time, I also co-founded a magazine called No Greater Good with a couple other USC architecture grads. For me personally, this was an excuse to use the creative skills that you get to use in school, but not necessarily in your first design job. After we launched our first issue, I primarily owned the digital piece, so creating a website website that conveyed our brand, sold magazines, and let people know where they could get them. And this was my first foray into digital product design and set me up for my first freelance design role with Amazon. At Amazon, I got to work on the Amazon website, the Audible app, and the Kindle app. Specifically, I worked on a feature that allows people to pair Kindle ebooks with Audible audiobooks, so you can switch between reading and listening without losing your place. A big part of digital product design is figuring out how your designs fit into users' lives, which is a little bit different than architecture because typically you're figuring out how people's lives fit in your design. For Audible, a lot of our users were commuters, so people who would read at home and then maybe listen on the train. And you can kind of see like this is just make 2D, like super easy work that product designers haven't seen and they're always impressed. And we use that to basically create like an interactive day in the life experience that helps us understand like how people are using our product, and it helps us figure out how to improve the product to better meet users' needs. I then got to lead design for a really kind of interesting project with Google. Google is collecting all your data with Chrome, and something really interesting is that actually 50% of people will close out of a mobile website if it takes more than 3 seconds to load. So that means, you know, for businesses, you're losing out on money, and Google's losing out on ad revenue every time people exit. So I help design an experience that helps communicate the importance of site speed and how they can fix it. And part of that is this tool which you can kind of type in your site and competitor's site and see where you rank. A big part of product design is also interaction design, which is the feedback you give a user as they engage with your site. Architecture kind of helped me out here again too, because you know we're really comfortable working in 3D, and this is like kind of an onboarding animation that helps tell the story of the product in an engaging way. For my next thing is sort of like, this is really in the beta, but, oh, sorry, I skipped one. But we got to debut this product at Mobile World Congress. Mobile World Congress is basically a big conference in Barcelona with a bunch of tech nerds who focus on the future of mobile and what innovation looks like. So it was really exciting to be a part of that conversation. For the next kind of thing I was really interested in working on was an immersive design experience. So I helped an office convert an unused closet into an interactive meditation room where you can pick between different meditation modes, and based on what you select, like the room will start to respond. And kind of the main takeaway I want in the big neon slide is, you know, product design and architecture are converging rapidly. Between service design, AR, VR, immersive design, there's a ton of overlap in the two disciplines. If you trace product design back, it actually really exists. It was first called UX design, and it had its foundations in architectural modernism. So there's a really heavy focus on simplicity and minimalism, and you can see that in the work of Google. Designers champion like Dieter Rams and Mies van der Rohe. After that, you can even see a bit of brutalism in there. This is where, you know, design became more focused on optimization and conversion and selling. That's why sites like Amazon look the way they do. Even though it's really ugly, it sells. So, you know, that's kind of how brutalism manifested. And then, unfortunately, postmodernism too, which is like really reactionary. It's where designers kind of begin rejecting like the homogeneous nature of modernism and like how everything kind of starts to look the same. So they start to design a little bit more emotionally, trying to be a little bit more provocative. And then now there's a huge push for design systems, which is pretty similar to kind of what Corbusier did with his 5 points, where here's a set of rules to kind of make anything. The most famous one you probably interact with every day is material design, which is by Google, but almost every company now is kind of rushing to make their own. And so I would say like right now is a really interesting time as someone with an architecture background to dive into product design. So if you're interested, like, do it now. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Gabby. I graduated from USC with my B.Arch in 2015. I then went to RISD to get my master's. I worked a few years in Boston and am now back in LA working at Rap Studio and also pursuing some independent work. And my independent work involves looking at choreographies and music videos and analyzing the movements happening in those videos and translating them into proposals for art installations. And so my interest in movement actually started back during my time at USC doing my thesis. It was about scripting movement and trying to figure out a way to generate like random circulation threads that could exist independently and without the typical kind of spatial architectural program. And after graduation, I started to write for Interiors Journal, analyzing music videos for publication. And one of my favorites was working with my friend Andrew Winghart on his choreography for Justin Timberlake's Cry Me a River. And the concept behind Andrew's video was to use over 30 dancers moving back and forth in different ways to emulate a body of water. And so in watching the video way too many times, I started to break down how the dancers were moving through the space over the course of the video. And that resulted in generating these kind of like GIF studies that break down the dance into like 4-second frames to sort of study how the dancers are moving at rapid speeds and different pacing and sort of just the formations that they're creating over the course of the video. And then kind of like zooming in on the actual details of how the dancers are moving. What was really interesting about this piece was the way that the dresses were engaging with each of the dancers. And so even though all the dancers were kind of doing the same movements and following each other, the dresses were starting to interact to the dancer in a very unique and independent way. And so I tried to sort of capture those ephemeral qualities through these like topographic studies of the dresses moving over time and kind of swaying and that fluidity and buoyancy that comes from the movement of a dress. And so fast forward to about a year ago, I saw that Bon Iver and the National had a open call for art installation proposals for their music festival, Eau Claire's. And the prompt was really open. They just wanted to have a music festival grounded in being present. They didn't want to release a lineup. They're like, if you want to go, like you really want to be there. And so that got me thinking about what it means to be present. And so this partie diagram kind of explored what it was like to be a kid again and just childhood in general, being outside, balloons, bubbles, things like that nature. And the proposal ended up being kind of a literal translation of 500 large balloons tucked into the forest of the music festival grounds. They kind of have these like trails that kind of go through the back or away from the stages. And what was interesting or really important about the sort of placement of the installation was thinking about it relative to movement and wanting to engage people to interact with the installation, because the balloons were more or less static and kind of weighed down by just a weight. But I wanted the balloons to be able to kind of move around similar to the way that the like dancers move around in a music video, basically. And so by placing the balloon installation at the intersection of a path, there was an opportunity for this like repeating field that was kind of overwhelming to encourage people to kind of divert away from the path and actually walk just underneath the trees and begin to engage with the balloons in that way, and just really emphasize this kind of moment of being present, kind of tucked between these balloons that are tucked underneath the canopy of trees. And kind of going back to just different ways that music videos are formatted. That is a very important kind of idea of playing on perspective, and so similar to how music videos kind of use strategic camera angles to capture the formations that they're trying to capture, the balloons kind of took on this, at moments, very linear, forced kind of section perspective, looking like it's kind of cutting through the trees. But as you walked underneath it, there's actually understanding that each balloon was different and kind of reacting to whether the sun was hitting it or the wind was kind of swaying it slightly differently than the balloon next to it, similar to the way that the dresses kind of behaved. And yes, my team and I literally inflated 500 balloons. And balloons do not last very long, so the night before the festival I had 2 balloons up, and the director was a little concerned. But we woke up really early each morning and inflated 500 plus balloons and placed them by the time that the gates opened. And it was pretty successful. The familiarity of a balloon kind of really resonated with the festival goers, and they were, touching it, kind of bouncing it around, pulling on the string, and also found themselves kind of going back at multiple times throughout the day. That's just because of the way that the balloons were reacting to the light, whether that be natural or the light that was provided by the festival. People got their selfies, of course. But by nightfall, the installation actually kind of transformed because we put LED lights in each balloon. And so they kind of gave this like moonlit glow, and kind of just completely transformed its presence by the time night fell. And kind of the big takeaway with this whole process and work that I'm doing is that, keep studying and doing what interests you. Even just if it's, analyzing music videos, there's a lot of good sort of analytical qualities that can be transformed into an architecture and become a fairly successful art installation. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Nicholson, McMillan. I graduated last year with the M.Arch 2018, so I went through the 3-year M.Arch program here. And before that, I did my undergraduate in the University of Melbourne in Australia, and then decided that I wanted to come out to LA to sort of experience architecture out here. So when I graduated from school last year, I guess I was sort of searching and I really enjoyed school, and was sort of searching and looking for that same sort of creative environment, and I still just wanted to be creating and continually making. So that sort of was sort of the genesis for sort of where my work is now, carried me through. So it originated and started sort of through my thesis. I remember sort of going through, and I wasn't sort of really sure, like many people are when they go through their thesis, what exactly it is that they were doing. But at a certain point along the way, I came upon this sort of method for developing these strange sort of discrete objects and looking at how they interact with the building. But moving on from that, I was really interested in further exploring these sort of objects, discrete objects, and how they could interact and be placed in different contexts within society and move sort of beyond architecture. So at the end of last year, I was very fortunate to be invited to contribute to the Impermanent Collection at the A+D Museum, which was a new initiative to sort of promote and exhibit the work of young designers, and for me, provided a platform to sort of share sort of my work and my explorations outside of an academic environment. And so through this process, I kept sort of refining and developing these follies that I call them, and I increasingly sort of became sort of interested in them as sculptural sort of art objects, and interested in the peculiarity of form and sort of the meetings and intersections of different geometries, and just making this sort of weird, strange stuff. So this is part of a series of 3 pieces that I made for that exhibition, which is cool. So they're all 3D printed in pieces and then sort of painted and glued together. So sort of the next step for me in these explorations was to jump up in scale and sort of look at sort of the potential of these objects once they got bigger, sort of beyond sort of the size of a small object, and sort of looking at once I ran them up to the scale to a human scale, a more interactive scale, and to see sort of the results of that. And what I found with that is that they took on even more sort of weirder, strange characteristics, and then suddenly once they were at the size of a person, they became much more animated and interactive. So this was just a weird proposal I did for placing them in an exhibition, where suddenly they're at the scale of a person. They're interacting and interacting with the people that are experiencing it. And again, it's sort of, for me, it was just a sort of a fun way to keep producing stuff and look at sort of how I could sort of keep making stuff and explore things at a different scale. So I was also sort of interested in then how these objects, once they are placed together, they can speak and create relationships to each other, and then the people who are also experiencing them in the space. So then with this, as I sort of took them up in scale, it was sort of important that I then sort of thought about how that I could fabricate these. Up until this point, I was 3D printing them in my studio apartment at sort of a scale which was sort of easy to manage. But if I was going to make them 3 to 6 feet, it would sort of reach a point at which I wouldn't be able to make them with my 3D printer. So I was sort of looking at how I could panelize them, and then was looking at how I could then sort of place them into different sort of contexts and different scales. So what I was interested in here was that how suddenly if you place it in comparison to the previous project, you place it into a more static environment, suddenly the object is perceived very differently and is perceived more as a static, fixed little object, and how it could easily sort of be a furniture piece at the scale of a room. So I was also, I was being very interested in looking at them at different scales. So then this next step was to take it even bigger, and increasingly you'll see the work is getting probably weirder and stranger. And then with this one, as it sort of grew up in scale to something that's maybe 40 to 50 feet tall, I wanted to make it a little bit more architectural and look at sort of how it would play out if I attempted to make it somewhat real architecture, if you could call it real architecture. But what I was sort of interested in is how I could sort of take these objects, expand the scale, and look at sort of the results of the different kinds of weird spaces. And in its essence, it's still a folly, so it's still an unprogrammed space. But I was sort of excited by the different kind of spaces and weird sort of things that they could create. So I placed it in this parking lot for no real reason other than I already had sort of a 3D model of downtown LA. And then I'm envisioned looking at it as some kind of venue that could be a festival or a concert or something. So this last project that I'm going to show sort of represents a sort of different kind of track of my sort of work that I've been exploring. This was for a competition for a skyscraper, funnily enough, that I did with a colleague of mine. As we went through this project, what I sort of found was that it was finding similar sort of themes of exploring the peculiarities and sort of oddities of architecture. So this project, we took that same model of downtown LA and took the existing sort of buildings and we're deriving new characters and new buildings from the existing building with an idea of sort of creating them as some kind of weird connected system of building that floats above the existing city and creates this, reimagines the vertical skyscraper horizontally. So I guess with this sort of body of work that I've been working on, it's at the moment this is sort of a fitting sort of end to my presentation, I guess, because it's, for me, this is, I'm still not really sure what the sum of these parts are or the sum of this work, but for me it's just important that I sort of keep making and creating, and who knows, you might find some interesting stuff out of it. Thank you.
Hello.
My name is Nicole, and I graduated in 2018 as well. So I guess I'll start off by talking about content. Before coming to architecture school, I worked as a photographer, and then once I got here, I started this program in the cinema school that was kind of new media, video-based stuff, a lot of that kind of stuff, and kind of started developing a style of content between that and photography. And so that program actually required a thesis project. So during 5th year, instead of doing 2 separate thesis projects, I decided to do one big super thesis project about architecture and kind of merging all of that. And I chose a topic that I didn't really know anything about, which was fashion, and kind of created this world based around upcycling based, and designed like a world that kind of, a speculative world that turned waste into kind of treasure and resold it to rich people as kind of a cool joke. And then I, for the cinema school part, built a pop-up shop, designed some clothes and made them, and then did like a kind of social media campaign to go along with it, which none of this is that social media stuff, but it's stuff that I've been doing since graduating. And so I then graduated. People kept hitting up the Instagram that I made, mostly like 12-year-olds who wanted to like buy the jacket that I made, until finally this kind of crazy French vegan lady found me on Instagram and was like, hey, can I use your jacket for an exhibit? And I was like, yeah, sure. So this is the jacket, and then we just got to talking more, and she was like, oh, you work in experiential marketing. Well, I have 1,000 square feet of this exhibit space that needs designing. Do you want to design it? So I was like, yeah, sure. So it was this crazy project with no budget and no time, and I called on a lot of my fellow recent graduates to come help me, put a bunch of tape on the floor. It actually went super well. The whole event was about like sustainability and vegan fashion and cutting edge kind of options for the fashion industry on how to move away from all the super wasteful practices that are present in it. So it went really well. My day job is in experiential marketing. I wasn't there for the second day of this event because I had to like be at work. But the second day, the crazy French lady I did this with calls me. She's like, Kanye's people are here. I think they're going to reach out to you. And then while I was on that call with her, I missed a call. And so I called this number back and I was like, hello, you just called me. And he was like, oh yeah, this is Kanye. And I was like, what? And so he was like, yeah, here, I'll FaceTime you to prove it. So I FaceTime Kanye, and he was like, come to Chicago right now. And I was like, well, I'm at work. And I was like, I can come tonight, I guess. And he was like, yeah, I'll hook you up with my assistant. Bring that jacket. So I go to Chicago, not really knowing what he wanted. I like assumed he was going to buy the jacket. But so I get there, they like give me like a time and a location, and they're like, be here at 4 o'clock in this weird warehouse that has no listed anything about it. And I was like, okay. So I show up, and Kanye's like getting a haircut and like interviewing someone, and just like brings me in and is like, hey, tell me about this jacket. So I tell him about the jacket, and he's like, well, tell me more. And so I present like the whole thesis project, and he is like very about it. And he's like, okay, thanks. Let's go look at all my shoes and all my other factories now. I want you to consult on all these random things that you're not really qualified to consult on. And he was very impressed by the architecture background because he loves architecture. And I was like, hey, can you solve all these really crucial world problems for me, like in the next week before I go to Africa? I was like, yeah, okay, I'll try. So that happened. He went to Africa. I haven't really heard much from him since. And then I came back, sorry I'm behind, and then the crazy French vegan lady hit me up again and was like, yo, let's start a fashion week. I'm like, okay, this sounds really hard, but okay. Again, no budget. I used a lot of my wonderful friends to help me build all of these things. So I did 2 installations for this 4-day event. Almost broke my finger building this one. And then, so there were 2 runway shows, one at the Natural History Museum, one in downtown LA. The whole event was about promoting vegan fashion, cruelty-free fashion, sustainable fashion. It was the first event of its kind, so we got some pretty good like press coverage and whatnot. Yeah, I guess in sum, I would say make good connections with your fellow classmates. So help you build weird stuff after graduating. And just like go with the flow, even if you don't know what you're doing. Like I was like styling these models, and I'm not a stylist, but I was like, yeah, I'll do this, okay. Yeah, just make good friends. Do what you want to do. Have fun with your life. And on that note, find a good person who also wants to do weird stuff and then move in with them and then try and start a studio in your garage. Alex Weisfeld, everyone.
Hi, I'm Alex. I graduated in May with Nicole, and I helped her make a bunch of stuff. And I also like to make stuff, so there's a bunch of stuff I made. Yeah, I'm not really sure what I'm doing yet. I don't know if I ever will, but at this point, I'm kind of just like taking whatever comes and rolling with it. So I call my shenanigans X_shop, because whenever I was procrastinating, this is like my file structure when I was in school, and all the crap that I wasn't supposed to be doing was always X_, and then whatever's at the bottom. And then I started actually making money from the last one, so I decided to call my business that. But anyways, here's a bunch of stuff that I made. Some of it's for fun, some of it's for work, some of it's product designs. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. But really, it's like, it is trying to take your studio creativity and, you know, everything that you learn in school and actually doing it after. Because I know it's really easy to, like, maybe not do that. It's really easy to take other stuff. So this is my first paid gig. I actually did this, like, while I was doing thesis, which is a really bad idea. I would not recommend it. But yeah, there was this crazy artist lady that just like showed up one time in the shop, and she was like, hey, can you help me make giant sunglasses? And I was like, oh yeah, sure, let's do it. And we did that. And then at that point, I had graduated at this point, and then I was interested in, you know, everything at this point. I don't know what to say no to, so I just said yes to everything. But this is like a super high-res, like, I guess, radio scan that NASA did like in the early 2000s, where they scanned pretty much the entire world except for Russia. And you're able to extract, like, I wrote a script that would take all that point data and turn it into like, you know, a 3D surface, which we could machine. So, I mean, it's crazy, but like if I wanted to, I could have like made that map 1-to-1 scale, and it would have been relatively accurate to like a meter or something. But anyways, this did other weird stuff like this. This one artist dude was like, hey, I was thinking about getting a robot. Can you convince me to get a robot? Not to me personally, but to people I'm working with. And in one day, I was like, okay, all right, I'll write a script. And I wrote a script in one day, and then the second day, we milled it, and it looks really bad, but you can blame that on me. The sculpture is actually pretty cool. But anyways, yeah, it's like, you know, just using the tools that you have available and trying to, like, I don't know, make something interesting or fun with it. And then I actually also said yes to Aaron and Curious Minds Los Angeles. Like, hey, you want to make some stuff? I was like, okay. So we made these giant rotating mirrors for this dance collaboration. It was pretty rad. It was real stressful, but it was cool. Anyways, I'm sure Aaron would do a much better job explaining this than I would. But anyways, it was really interesting. It was like all about movement and reflection and perception and like expanding what that is. And sorry, am I butchering this? You're doing great. Okay, great. Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. And then this is the first thing that I did that I didn't feel uncomfortable doing, because I was finally like, okay, I know how to do this stuff. Some guy came in with like a tiny little model, and he's like, hey, can we make this really big? And he's like, yeah, okay. And then the guy's Instagram was like, oh shit, these parts are a lot bigger now, and like he had to get a truck to take everything out. It was great. It was super cool. But yeah, there's a couple of things that, like, you know, I'm not looking for a paycheck or anything. Like, you know, I made a box. It's kind of cool. So, but I think it's kind of an important box. I made it for a coworker and a good friend of mine who he's working on me with another project in Boston right now. But yeah, he put a shiny piece of rock in there, and then yeah, this was kind of interesting. It's like these 4 little tiny steel dowels, and there's like magnets in the top, so you can like pick up the box with just the top, and it's like super satisfying. But anyways, yeah, she said yeah, it was a lot of fun. And the reason this slide's going to be on here for 20 seconds is because this is the team of people that are building the next project with me, except for the missus. She's uninvolved. But anyways, the next project is like probably the biggest, craziest thing I'm doing, which is a 80-foot sculptural steel bridge where there's like 299 structural members and like 540 something like intermediary members and all stuff, and not a single one's the same, and they're all it's crazy, but we're moving through it. This is a project that actually started as a studio at USC before I was here, and it's pretty crazy. It's like there's actually a whole lot of math that I'm doing that I didn't ever know I'd be able to do, and like, you know, prototyping and simulating things, and you know, instead of just seeing it on a screen, like we're actually like, okay, let's do exactly that and make exactly that. So we have to do that. And it's going to be kind of a mess. We're building this at the Autodesk build space in Boston, Massachusetts. And we're using a bunch of robots to position things in complex orientations, and then we're going to be doing human welding. So a huge part of like our push for this project was it's actually like robot-human collaboration. So this makes a lot of welders very like, rest assured, you're not losing your job yet. Anyways, it's like, it's so much stuff that if I just designed this and sent this to some contractor, like I would probably get 100 emails a day, and they'd be like, you're wasting all of our time, stop doing this. But like now that I'm actually there and I'm actually doing it all, and like, I'm like, hey, I can make this thing, but like in 3D, but can I make it in real life? Can it work in real life? So it's a lot of like this battle of like, you know, what works, what doesn't work. But I haven't forgotten about architecture yet. So I actually, while I was doing that, I did this competition for the Chicago Architecture Club. And it's like open-ended entry, and me and Proe Liao, we worked on this thing together and we submitted it. It's pretty much, there's this housing project called Cabrini Green that got torn down, and the Chicago Housing Authority just totally moves a bunch of people around and then never really replaced them. So we kind of made it as like a big FU to those guys. Thanks.